Alright, hey, what's up guys? It's Zach Rowe with LB Certified Fitness. Coming back at you with another video. It's been a minute since I've done a video. Haven't been too motivated to make content, just not really finding what I enjoy like making, and I don't like just making content just because and then putting it out and getting like 3 views. Kinda sucks. Feels like a waste of time. But what my goals are more so going forward in the future, what I've noticed gets the most views is like more current event type stuff on things going on, fitness related, and the Cookbook Chronicles, which I was doing. I was making recipes from Greg Doucette's cookbook, anabolic cookbook. So I really like the Cookbook Chronicles. I've just been I haven't been like branching out into the cookbook more so. I've just found the recipes that I like and I've been sticking to them and making them over and over, like the anabolic French toast, for example. I eat that basically every day, but I'm getting kind of burnt out on that, so like I gotta find other recipes. So I'm gonna start making those soon. But in regards to more current event type stuff, I thought I'd start making a little bit of a series on athlete injuries. One that recently happened just a few days ago was Justin Turner. I'm a big Dodger fan. I was actually at the game, I believe it was game 4 of the NLCS, where he had a grade 2 hamstring strain, and yeah, a real devastating injury. Ended up not mattering too much because they won. They got to game 6, but they lost in game 6. So that would have been a big loss in the World Series, but they didn't make it that far. That's okay. It is what it is. I've said my piece with it. Yeah. But I was thinking, I see these kind of types of videos on YouTube quite a bit of like doctors doing medical breakdowns on athlete injuries and whatnot. So obviously I'm not a doctor. If you don't know, I'm a personal trainer. I have my degree in kinesiology. Personal trainer, health coach. I am currently prepping to get my CSCS. If you're unfamiliar, it's the Certified Strength and Conditioning Coach. I want to work with more athletes, so I figured this would be good. So I'm not going to be looking at it as like a surgery. Like, I'll briefly go over like the surgery if that's required, and I'll briefly go over the medical stuff, but that's not really my forte. It's more kind of getting into rehab and like post-rehab, what you'll kind of be looking at for different types of injuries for these athletes. And unfortunately with sports, it is what it is. Injuries happen, so that's always going to be happening. I'm going to do this one, and I know Baker Mayfield had a pretty bad injury. I believe it was last week. His labrum and humerus. I haven't done a lot of research on that, but I'm kind of familiar. So I think I'm going to do this one, and if I like how it goes, I'm gonna do the Baker Mayfield one. And then, like I said, injuries constantly happening in all kinds of sports. Sports are constantly going on, as long as there's not COVID, So yeah, let's just jump into it. Alright, so first off, before we do anything, is we gotta kind of identify what a grade 2 hamstring strain is. So there's 3 different levels, 1, 2, and 3. 1 is just like a mild strain of the muscle belly. Nothing too serious. It'll be like a few days to maybe a week recovery process. Mild swelling, possibly bruising. Nothing too crazy. Grade 2 is when it gets a little bit more serious. It's a partial tear in the muscle. So with this one, it's going to be a lot more swelling, a lot more muscle damage, a lot more blood flow to the area. You're going to see bruising. So yeah, that's that. And then grade 3 is a full tear of the muscle. So hamstring is a pretty big muscle. A grade 3 hamstring complete tear is probably going to be pretty rare. I can't even think of an athlete recently that had a grade 3. So yeah, if you have a grade 3, you're super screwed. But for grade 2, yeah, it's a partial tear in the muscle. So it's going to be, a couple weeks to potentially a couple months rehab process, depending on how bad the partial tear is, because a partial tear could mean lots of different things. It's a pretty wide margin, so it could be a couple weeks to a couple months. So it depends on how bad it is. Also, it could be a tendon. You know, it doesn't necessarily have to be in one of the hamstring tendons. It doesn't necessarily have to be the muscle. So you much rather be in the muscle because muscle has really good blood flow, so it's going to recover quicker, as opposed to tendon, which is a connective tissue, and connective tissue doesn't get nearly as good a blood flow. So I'm pretty sure, I don't have 100% certainty that it's not in the tendon, but I'm pretty sure it's the muscle because, like I said, I was at the game. I saw him grab like the middle of his hamstring. Tendons are obviously will connect the bone to the muscle, right? Liggy twiggy, bone to bone. Yeah, so tendons are bone to muscle, and ligaments are bone to bone. So, yeah, that's the bright side, I suppose. So a couple weeks to a month recovery. Couple weeks to a couple months. We'll just say this is a rough estimate, you know, nothing too crazy. So yeah, that's the time, and then also like what will affect the recovery process is how aggressively you're going at it with the recovery. So pretty much everyone in sports medicine will, once you have an injury, will say RICE, which is rest, ice, compression, elevation. So you know, like that's what I grew up on when I was in sports and whatnot. You know, I was a swimmer. When at the end of the day, you know, you're like my right shoulder to this day still bugs me because of swim and whatnot, and what the kind of injury, chronic injury I gave myself. But what you do every time if your shoulder is feeling a little not great, you just go to the sports med place after practice and ice your arm. Now I forget the name of the doctor who created the RICE protocol, but he has since created that, said that he retracts that protocol, and you really shouldn't do it. The problem is that it's just so integrated in sports culture, and everyone knows RICE, and it's just such a big thing. A lot of people don't really know that you shouldn't be doing that, and really, it's not the whole. How do I? Oh, whoops! I put I twice. It's not the whole protocol. It's really, actually, just the problem. The main problem is the ice part of it. Because what ice does is it slows down the inflammatory process. But in the acute stages of an injury, you want the inflammatory response because that's what helps with the recovery. That you know, that bruising and all the extra blood flow and blood to the affected area is what helps the recovery process. The blood carries, you know, we always think blood carries the oxygen, right? But it carries all the nutrients and whatnot to help the recovery process. So when you ice it, it shunts away the blood. And because you know, when you hurt something, it gets hot, right? So you know, the ice cools it and makes it so it's not as hot, and the blood goes elsewhere from the affected area, which is counterproductive to what you want to be doing. You want the inflammatory process to go through that. That's that first, like, probably 48 to 72 hours is the acute inflammation process. Inflammation. 48 to 72 hours. Really, all you want to be doing with ice or anti-inflammatories, NSAIDs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, is you really only want to be taking those if it's just so painful that it's unbearable. Really, that's the only reason you want to use ice, is to reduce pain. Otherwise, you're slowing down the recovery process, and it's not quite as efficient. So yeah, the more you know. And I'll if I remember, I'll put the RICE protocol and the doctor that made it and has since retracted it, I'll put it in the description. So yeah, that's the acute effects there. All right, so before we even get into any kind of strengthening or stretching or anything, you just want to be able to move properly and get around and whatnot, and just light range of motion, nothing too strenuous on the hamstrings. So any kind of like walking or cycling, like I would recommend on a recumbent bike. Cycle. Yeah. So what that will do is kind of like an active recovery in between workouts. It will increase blood flow. So this is after like acute inflammation, 72 hours. So this is after, and you've rested and you let the muscle kind of repair as much as it can. And in many cases, you're not going to need surgery. They're not going to go in and physically reattach the muscle. You 9 times out of 10 be fine. So what you're going to want to do is to kind of keep that recovery process going. Is some kind of active recovery, light cardiovascular movement, because that will slightly increase your heart rate, and it's kind of doing something similar of what your acute inflammation, but you're forcing it upon your body and increasing blood flow to those muscles. So it's nothing too strenuous. You're not going to get a big stretch or big load on the muscle. It's just getting blood in there and more nutrients and help with the recovery process. So next we'll be moving on to the exercises and stretches and mobility work that you can do to get back the flexibility in the muscle and the strength in the muscle. So you want to be really careful when returning to exercise to not overdo it, because there's probably going to be a little bit of muscle atrophy from the few weeks to months that you've been out. And if you have a tear, you want to be careful not to overly stretch the muscle and do any more harm to the muscle. All right, and it's just very common in athletes, because athletes are just have that mindset of, I need to return to the field or the court or whatever it may be, and like to overrush things, especially if it's not at like the highest level and they don't have like a medical team there to advise them. You don't want to rush into anything. So really, it's extremely hard physiologically, and that gets in the sports psychology of it. Did I say physiological? I meant psychology. The sports psychology of it, and that's a whole nother topic for a whole nother day. And I'm really, that's not my forte. I know some sports psychology, but doing what you can outside of the sport you play to benefit yourself or to improve yourself in that meantime, when you let the muscle just do what it needs to recover. But once you get back into it, stretching, mobility work, and strength and exercises. So now the hamstring in particular, and now we're getting more into my forte. So this is like some good knowledge here. The muscle, the hamstring in particular, is a very interesting muscle because it's a biarticulate muscle. A biarticulate muscle means it's essentially, it attaches at two different joints, so it does two different actions. Okay, so it does hip extension, which is key, and then knee flexion. So your hip extension are all the kind of like compound movements that you're using your hamstrings for. So basically any kind of like deadlift motion, and any kind of variation of that, any kind of snatch, clean, swing, kettlebell swing, anything like that, you're using hip extension, a hip bridge, anything like that. Okay, in combination with your glutes, because your glutes are the primary mover. Hip extension, biggest muscle group, but your hamstrings help with that. Okay, and then knee flexion is not as well known of an action of the hamstring, but yeah, knee flexion, you bring your heel like up to your butt. If you're standing up, you pull your heel up to your butt. That's flexing the knee, and you're using your hamstring for that too. So combining both of these different actions will help strengthen all the muscles of the hamstring. Because you think of the hamstring as just one big muscle, but it's multiple different muscles that do different actions and whatnot. And also depending on where your tear is, one of those muscle bellies might be more effective than the other, and you might need to focus more on knee flexion or more on hip extension. That's just on a case-by-case basis. You're going to have to get a MRI and see where exactly the tear is, and your doctor, your surgeon, your physical therapist will be able to better direct you. But just know it's a biarticulate muscle, 2 different actions. Alright, so first is going to be more like stretching to regain the proper stretch and flex of the muscle. So hip extension that you can do to help stretch the muscle would be really just, I would recommend, best one is either get a partner or get a band. You're going to lay supine on the ground or a bench, and you're just going to pull up and keep the knee locked out. We're focusing on hip extension on this one, and pull, or have someone push. Make sure they know what they're doing. You don't want some dummy just cranking on your hamstring, right? So, and just push lightly for about 3 to 5 seconds to the range of motion where it's tight but not painful. All right, and then 3 to 5 seconds and let go. All right, back down, and then bring it back up again. Now this time, the idea behind the stretch is you're slowly going to improve the range of motion as you go. All right, so this one, theoretically, you should be able to get just a little bit higher. Hold for 3 to 5 seconds. And while you're doing this, I forgot to mention, is think about contracting the muscle, all right? Squeezing your hamstring while it's in that extended position, okay? And then 3 to 5 seconds, bring it back down, and just going back and forth. And every time, you'll probably be able to get your foot up higher, all right? So that's what I recommend for that, all right? And then for a stretch knee flexion, it's a little bit more challenging because your knee only goes so far. But what you could do is, if you have something called like the monkey feet, where you can put a dumbbell in that monkey feet contraption, and then just with a light weight, start with your knee bent, and just slowly lower the weight down to the ground. And this weight is going to be pulling on the muscle and letting it elongate and stretch through the range of motion. And then don't just curl it back up, right? We want to either have someone help you pull it up, or I think that would really only be the only way to do it, honestly, unless you had some kind of rubber band contraption. Let me double check this is recording. Yes, it is. Perfect. Some kind of rubber band contraption to help pull you back up. You could do it like that too, but ideally you can have someone help you back through the concentric, the lifting phase, and you're just focusing on the eccentric, the lowering phase, and letting the muscle elongate with that load slowly down. Okay? So there's a couple of stretches for the hamstring, getting hip extension, knee flexion. Once you're feeling comfortable with those, then start to integrate your movement patterns again. So just doing a standing hip hinge. So standing up tall, hands on your hip, and going through hip hinge like you're doing an RDL, something like that. But just body weight, again, not putting any kind of significant load. You're just getting a good stretch and trying to get the movement pattern back down, because there's a bunch of trauma in the muscle. All the motor units are all messed up, and you haven't been doing any kind of movement right, so the neurons aren't firing to the proper muscle fibers. So you're just trying to rebuild that neuromuscular control in the muscle and get that hip hinge movement back down. Because that's the key. The hip extension, right, is with the hamstring is that hip hinge. That's the next big step after you're walking, cycling, and doing your stretches, is to get the movement patterns back down. So yeah, and then once you've been doing that for a while, you're getting a good stretch in the muscle fiber. Then it's just about loading it back up. So there's a few different loads, weight exercises that I'd recommend to add load and rebuild the strength in the muscle. So number one, I would just recommend, yeah, an RDL is really key. Start light, very light, and just low repetitions, and slowly build up and work on that muscular endurance. So like, start wherever you need to start. It might be 5 reps, it might be 10 reps, wherever it may be, and then bump it up, and get into those higher like 20 ranges where you're still getting some hypertrophy. You're still coming close to failure, maybe like within like 4 reps of failure. You're not getting anywhere near failure though. You're not like, do not go to failure. That's not the objective yet, is to go like full on failure of the muscle, because we're just trying to build it back up, right? You can get to muscular failure and all that later on. So make sure you still have some reps in the tank, and getting up into those like higher 20, not trying to go any higher than like 30 reps. So that's what I recommend with the RDL. Another one is your hip bridge. So that's, your hamstring's more of a supplement to the hip bridge, and you're using your glutes a lot, but you are doing hip extension, and like we talked about, hip extension's key. Again, keeping the reps low, getting within 4 reps of failure, not going all the way to failure. Again, starting the weight low, reps low, and building it up 20 to 30. Okay, so hip bridge, here, let me write these down. RDL, hip bridge, and then last one, I'm going to throw out 2 there. So it's to build neuromuscular control. It's really beneficial to do closed chain movements. In the weight room, we really focus on lifting weights and external loads, but just being able to lift your own body weight is extremely challenging. So if you're not familiar with the open and closed, think of like a push-up. That's a closed chain where you have your hands connected to the earth, or like say a body weight squat. That's a closed chain, alright? Open chain is when you're lifting weights, so or external weight rather. So instead of like a push-up, you're doing a bench press, and you're pushing an external weight away from you. Or like for pulling, for example, a pull-up would be a closed chain, and like a lat pull-down would be an open chain. So we have 2 different ones. For knee flexion, we have a closed and an open. I lean more towards the open chain, the closed chain, and that's going to be a Nordic hamstring curl. And this is extremely good for just athletes in general. Say you don't even have a hamstring injury, you're just trying to strengthen your hamstrings. Nordic hamstring curls are muy importante. Hamstring. So you're going to either have a partner hold onto your heels, or have some kind of like a squat rack or something that won't move, that's secure, and lock your heels into that, and then knees on the ground. And you're probably, if you're rehabbing, your strength in your hamstring is going to be diminished, so you're probably going to want to use a rubber band to help assist you. But basically the idea is to lower, using your knee as your leverage point, going down to the ground as low as you can, and then coming back up. If you're coming back from a hamstring injury, you're almost certainly not going to be able to do even 1 rep, let alone a whole set. So what you can do is get a band, attach it to an anchor point up above you, behind you, and have it come across your chest. And so as you go down, the rubber band's going to stretch more. It's going to give you more assistance, more elasticity, and help you come back on the concentric, the lifting phase. All right. So that of all these exercises, I'd probably say that is probably the most beneficial for athletes in general. You're going to build a lot of strength really quickly. Okay. Once you're feeling stronger, or say you don't have any kind of hamstring injury, you can just try and do those body weight. And then even if you're crazy enough, it's extremely challenging, but loaded, you can have like a plate hold on your chest and go down and back up. So really good exercise there. If you don't feel comfortable doing those, or you don't have like a rubber band at your gym or at your house where you train or whatever, you can do like a dumbbell hamstring curl. Or again, if you have the monkey feet thing, you can do it like that. but essentially you lay prone on your stomach, and then you squeeze a dumbbell in between your 2 feet, and you curl up as high as you can, squeeze the muscle, and lower it back down. So kind of like that stretch that we were talking about earlier, except you're going through the full range of motion. You're doing the concentric and the eccentric, as opposed to the stretch where you're just focused on the eccentric and getting a stretch in the muscle. You're not contracting as well. So you don't have to have anyone assist you with it and getting it back up. You're just going to go up and down, full range of motion, and that's going to be an open chain hamstring exercise as opposed to the closed chain Nordic hamstring curl. Both are good. I would lean more towards the Nordic IMO. So yeah, and that's it. And you're just going to, start. Rep ranges are going to be high for all of these, and you're just going to slowly bring them down. The rep ranges, increase the weight, and then as you get back into regular athletic training, you're going to go through your mesocycles of your preseason, your on season, and your off season, and you're going to vary your weights. So, and that depends also on your sport, but you're going to get a more power training, and so you probably will drop all these. And your main hip extension movement will be something powerful like a deadlift, or power or strength based. It's going to be really low rep ranges, high weight. It's going to be something like a deadlift or a clean or a snatch or something like that, And then as you're going into season, you're going to have to scale it down a little bit. You're going to go more for longevity and just keeping your joints healthy and stuff like that. So you probably do a little bit more hip bridges and RDLs, and not going completely for failure, because you don't want to destroy your muscles before your games and whatnot. And then off season is probably going to be more of your hypertrophy time. So your 6 to 30 rep range and different movements. And I would stick with your hip extension, your hip hinge movements on that lower end of your 6 to 30 when you're doing the hypertrophy, and then you can do more of your knee flexion and your Nordics and your hamstring curls in the higher rep ranges, because that's the best response. If you're more interested in that, like the hypertrophy part of hamstring training, check out RP Strength, Renaissance Periodization, Dr. Mike Israetel. He has a whole breakdown of it, but that's what the muscles respond to the best, is heavier for the hip hinge and the extension movements, and then lighter for your knee flexion movements. And that's going to be like your off-season time, when you're trying to put on muscle and whatnot. You're not competing every day or every week, and then just going through your cycles. And now you might not even be an athlete. Maybe you just blew your hamstring out, and you're just an average kind of Joe, maybe weekend warrior type of softball player or something like that. And all these concepts sound crazy. I have a programming video up on my page. Your average gym goer, they don't really go through cycles. They're just doing the same thing pretty much year round, and you're not getting any kind of progress. So think about adding some cycles in of what you're doing, and not just doing the same 3 sets of 12 year round, same movements. But vary your movements a little bit, learn about mesocycles, all that kind of stuff. That's even more deep. But anyways, let me double check this is still recording. It is. So then I guess the nice thing about all this for Justin Turner is that it happened right at the end of the season. He wasn't able to finish out the season, but I don't know if his presence would have made the difference. I'd like to say probably not. So, but now he has this whole off season. It's unfortunate because the off season is kind of like when you're trying to improve and get better, but ultimately he's just trying to get back to baseline this whole off season. And it's tough for him because he's getting a little bit older. I believe he's in his late 30s, like 37, 38, something like that. So it's going to be more challenging. As you get older, it's harder to recover. Your body doesn't bounce back right away. And, I should have talked about this at the beginning of the episode, or this video rather, but, he's an elite athlete, right? So these things don't just happen to everyone. And you usually assume like a hamstring strain like this, it's like you weren't warming up properly, or you were doing something stupid or whatever. He was just, routine running down first base like he does, multiple times a night. Really what was the problem for him, I think, at the end of the day, is he played a whole 162 games season, and then also at the end he was playing extra games in postseason, and the accumulation of fatigue and just the repetitions, and like I said, getting older, it's harder to recover from day to day, plus all the travel. It just was too much for his body, and eventually just something popped, and it happened to be that. So that what I try and stress to all of my older clients is really, really focus on the recovery. It's not the fun stuff. It's not, getting out and playing sports and working out. It's not the fun stuff. But if you want to do the fun stuff, you got to do the prehab, if you will, kind of stuff to stay in the game. So yeah, that's it. Hopefully I broke this down well enough. Like I said, focus more on my forte in the fitness industry, if you will, with the exercise post-rehab kind of stuff. If you like this, I would appreciate if you wrote in the comments, because like I said, I'm planning on doing some more of these with other athletes. Yeah, that's it. Leave a like. If you're interested in training with me, check out my website. It'll be linked down below. Check out all my other stuff on the page. I got content, all kinds of stuff. And this has been Zach with LB Certified Fitness, and peace.